This is Chapter 6 of U.S. Government. In this chapter, we're covering the President's Cabinet. You're going to learn to describe the President's Cabinet, identify the names of the executive departments, give reasons why the number of executive departments has increased, and describe the responsibilities of the Departments of State, Treasury, and Justice. To identify the responsibilities of each of the executive departments. Okay, so these are the 15 executive departments. The President has a group of advisors called the Cabinet, and the Cabinet is made up of all of these departments. So the President appoints the Cabinet members, but Congress must approve the members before they can serve. So the heads of the executive departments are called the secretaries. So you might have heard, for instance, the Secretary of State. Except for the head of the Justice Department, he's called, or she's called, the Attorney General. Each cabinet member is responsible for running their executive department and advising the president. So they offer counsel to the president. A secretary must have knowledge and experience in the department, so they need background in that particular field. So the Secretary of Agriculture, for example, may be a farmer or have a background in agriculture. The Secretary of Treasury should have financial experience. So the cabinet members meet with the president as a group to discuss important issues. The cabinet helps the president make decisions. So as you look here on this slide, there's 15 of these departments. So how are they organized? Well, they are made up of smaller units called bureaus, offices, services, or divisions. So under each of those blocks, there's even finer organizations. These offices are not all in Washington. They're all over the country. Like the Department of Agriculture has offices in every state so that it can help farmers and consumers through its many food services. Its Food and Nutrition Service provides stamps and maintains the school lunch program. These programs make food available to those in need. So let's briefly go over each department so you have a general idea. The Department of Agriculture oversees farmers to be sure food production meets demand. Commerce, the Department of Commerce, oversees business and trade within the United States and in foreign countries. Okay, so they deal with trade. Defense is pretty explanatory. It maintains the country's defense and provides military training for the Army, Navy, and Air Force. The Department of Education oversees the country's schools. The Department of Energy finds and protects sources of energy. The Department of Health and Human Services handles programs to promote health and social services and needs of American citizens. Homeland Security works together with many government agencies to make the country more secure. And they're probably busy right now due to what happened recently with the Boston bombings. The Housing and Urban Development handles problems of cities related to housing, conservation, and air pollution. So urban development also includes conservation and air pollution. The Department of Interior oversees the country's natural resources, so you might see the Forestry Department under that as an example. The Department of Justice makes sure federal laws are carried out. The Department of Labor provides services for American workers and establishes safety standards for workplaces. So that's an important one if you ever have issues with safety in your workplace. The Department of Labor might be someone you'd want to contact within it. Department of State maintains relationships with other countries and protects American citizens while they are in other countries. The Department of Transportation oversees the nation's system of highways, roadways, air travel, and waterways. And the Department of Treasury collects taxes, borrows money, pays bills, and prints money. And last, the Department of Veterans Affairs provides services to veterans of American wars and maintains national cemeteries and veteran hospitals. So the number of departments has grown. They have been added as needed. Congress set up these departments with Senate approval to take care of certain areas of the government. And Congress has closed some departments and combined others as the country needs have changed. So with current times, you'll see shifts. Let's briefly touch on the departments of State, Treasury, and Justice. These departments make policies and advise the president on important areas of national life. So they make a plan that the country follows. This includes foreign policy, so dealing with other countries, the economy, and legal matters. And foreign policy is the plan a country follows in dealing with other countries. So that is something to think about. So what the State Departments do is they create foreign policy. This has to do more with international relations. In 2013, Secretary of State John Kerry took over. It was Hillary Clinton before that. And so part of his role is to maintain good relationships with other countries. He heads a large staff of officials. He also sends people all over the world to represent the U.S. And we call these people, when they work in another country, ambassadors. And they work for the State Department. And they have assistants called ministers. A consul is a representative sent to help U.S. citizens in foreign countries. Office is called a consulate, and they build foreign trade and commerce, so they help with our economy and our relationship with other countries. They protect American citizens who travel, work, or own property in foreign countries. And they're also in charge of passports. So one thing about the consulate that you should know if you're in another country, sometimes issues come up. For instance, if you visit a country that actually is having some kind of civil war, you might accidentally get caught up in it, and perhaps they strip you of your passport or try to rob you or try to imprison you for some strange reason. You'll want to find a consulate, because that is where your safety is. So that's something to remember when you travel. Always know where the nearest consulate is. The Department of Treasury collects taxes, borrows money, and pays money back. They supervise making of paper money, coins, and postage stamps. And they also manage government accounts and informs the President about financial standing of the U.S. They also supervise the national banks and ensure government money is spent as Congress has decided it should be spent. So under the Department of Treasury, there are three main units. The Secret Service is one of them. So if you look in the center, there's the Department of Treasury, and there's arrows pointing into it. And believe it or not, the Secret Service is not a part of the Department of Defense, like many people think. It's with the Treasury. Also, as we see, it was established as law enforcement agency in 1865. So this agency protects the president and former presidents even, and anyone visiting from foreign countries. It enforces laws against making counterfeit money or fake money that looks like real money. So it is a federal crime to make or use counterfeit money. That's a big crime. And I think that's why originally in 1865 the Secret Service was placed with the Department of Treasury. There were issues around people making counterfeit money. Under the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, they make the designs and print all the U.S. paper money, postage stamps, and Treasury bonds. It helps other agencies design documents that require protection from counterfeiting or making fake copies. So there are many issues with masterful people who know how to counterfeit important documents For instance, a passport. Under the Internal Revenue Service, which is under the Department of Treasury, the Internal Revenue Service collects taxes from individuals and from businesses, and that's a great source of revenue for the United States government. It's what keeps public services such as education going. The Department of Justice has 4 important agencies. These agencies cover a wide range of topics. The FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, carries out investigations when a federal law is broken. So they can arrest anyone who is accused of committing a crime against the federal government. The Environment and Natural Resources Division protects public lands and natural resources such as water, land, air, and waste materials. It also protects safety of drinking water, so it helps clean up of toxic water, land, or air. So it's really interesting to find that under the Department of Justice. There is the Bureau of Prisons, so all federal prisons and other places that house federal prisoners is under the Department of Justice. And then there are the United States Marshals Service. They are the oldest law enforcement agency in the nation. They protect federal courts and transport federal prisoners. So the Department of Justice enforces federal laws, the head is called the Attorney General, and they handle lawsuits in the Supreme Court that involve the U.S. government. So these are things to understand what operates under the Department of Justice. We're going to do a midway review, so what I want you to do is answer all of these questions to the best of your ability. Feel free to reference the slides. On a sheet of paper, please write the name of the department that does each of these activities. So number 1 is who prints money and postage stamps. Number 2, which department enforces federal laws. Number 3, is concerned with how the United States deals with other countries. Number 4, advises the president about the financial standing of the country. Number 5, helps protect Americans overseas. Now we're going into something, what do you think? So these are more opinion-oriented. Please answer fully. Why do you think the Departments of State and Treasury were 2 of the first departments Congress created? Number 2, do you think the United States should send ambassadors to other countries? And then explain your answer. Number 3, why do you think Americans need passports when they travel to foreign countries? So we're going to talk about agriculture, commerce, interior, and labor. These departments deal with land and business issues in the United States. Sometimes the departments develop laws or regulations to protect the land or to help farmers. They may also develop laws or regulations that protect workers or trade. And we'll get more into that in the following slides. Lucky you. The Department of Agriculture truly is in charge of ensuring the well-being of the people because the people depend on farmers. So farmers have a very important job of producing food for the nation. The government oftentimes will help farmers through subsidies or buying surplus food and assisting farmers in selling crops to foreign countries if there's too much in their crop. The department also helps farmers organize into cooperative groups to sell crops. Oftentimes we call these co-ops, and they help farmers buy supplies and equipment at lower prices because the equipment can be very pricey. Many agencies within the Agriculture Department help farmers plan and manage crops by using the best farming methods. These agencies inform farmers about how the market is for livestock and crops. So it informs the farmers what they should really be growing or what kind of livestock they should have at that point in time, because demand is always shifting. The agencies also help farmers get money they need to do their work, and there are two major agencies that do this. It's called the Natural Resources Conservation Service. That's one of them. And then the other one is Rural Development, and they lend money to farmers. I also wanted to include something that was interesting. I think in the previous chapter we talked about Franklin D. Roosevelt. During the Depression, people were going hungry, and there was no help for these people. It was very tragic. Children were going hungry and starving. So the crazy part was a lot of farmers had mass production of produce. It was going to waste, but people couldn't afford the produce. So Franklin D. Roosevelt developed the food stamp system. So it was a win-win situation. There was excess food and it didn't go to waste because food stamps were funneled out to families that really needed help. And now we still have that wonderful system in place. Food is not wasted, and food stamps supply what is needed to those in need. The Department of Commerce has to do with an interchange of goods and commodities, especially on a large scale between different countries. The Latin root of commerce is to trade together. So this has to do with the exchange of goods. The department oversees 4 main agencies. The first is the Census Bureau. And the Census Bureau is really important. It helps us understand the population in the United States and trends that are happening. So every 10 years, there's a report on the population. They also gather and publish information about the economy, population growth, and employment and housing opportunities. So this informs lawmakers and people in the Congress about what kind of policies that need to be made. It also helps companies choose locations for factories and other businesses. The Patent and Trade Office is another agency, and it issues patents to protect people who invent new products or even ideas, and they also protect trademarks when you have a special name or a symbol of a product. For instance, Kellogg is trademarked. It also protects inventors and creators for a period of time. This isn't forever. It's so that someone else doesn't copy your idea and profit off of it. Another one is the National Weather Service. It's under Commerce. They gather information about storms, frosts, floods, and earthquakes, and it helps protect farmers and pilots and other people who could be directly affected by the weather. Again, it's under Commerce, so that's interesting for you to take note. The last one is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They set standards, so there's a quality of the goods that are manufactured. I don't know if you've ever bought a piece of junk, but I have. So the National Institute of Standards and Technology should be setting high standards, and if there's a company that's violating those standards, I'm sure they would like to know. It also controls the methods of measurement that you see in goods, so there's the right size and weight amongst all the countries. The Department of Interior was created in 1849. They make sure the country's natural resources are used wisely. So they have a big job ahead of them, because I think all of us are well aware that we don't really use our country's resources that wisely as often as we should. So they have a big task ahead of them. They oversee care of land, water, minerals, fish, and wildlife, so it's pretty much our natural resources. The department has 4 main conservation agencies. I'm going to list them off. The first one is the National Park Service. The second one is the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The third is the Bureau of Land Management. And the fourth is Minerals Management Service. And the final one, the Fish and Wildlife Service. Not too long ago, for the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Bureau of Land Management had some issues in Humboldt County in California where farmers were draining their crops and toxic material was leached out into a river, and a tribe called the Yurok tribe relied on the salmon, and unfortunately there was, I think it was over 20,000 salmon, more than that, killed. And this completely impacted the tribe's culture, tradition, and source of food. So, of course, the Bureau of Indian Affairs also got involved, and there was arguments over who has rights to the land. And that's where that bumper sticker, "We all live upstream," comes from. It goes to show how interconnected we all are. The Department of Labor offers many services to American workers. It sees the federal laws concerning labor are carried out, such as the minimum wage. As an example, in 1991, the minimum wage was $4.25 per hour, and I know because I was making that much as a hotel maid. A new minimum wage became effective in 1997. And they raised it to $5.15 an hour. So oftentimes you'll see, to keep up with the cost of living, minimum wage will be raised. Hopefully one day they'll create something called a living wage rather than a minimum wage. The Department of Labor has many agencies or divisions, as all the departments, all of them do. So there's an Employment Standards Administration, and they make sure rules about minimum wage are being followed. And it also makes sure that there's fair hiring practices, because minorities need to be protected. Women, veterans, and disabled people oftentimes confront discrimination. It also oversees that laws concerning labor, such as child labor laws, protect children, because during the Industrial Revolution, 10-year-olds were working in dangerous factories, and we don't want that to happen. So the Department of Labor protects people, workers. Another very important agency under the Department of Labor is OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They set safety standards and inspect businesses to make sure the workplace is safe. And employers who do not meet safety standards are fined or it's closed down. And this is really important because during the Industrial Revolution, many workers were exposed to extremely unsafe conditions. Workers would get caught up in machinery and be crushed to death. Miners would be, the cave would implode and they'd be trapped. So this agency is very important. And then there's the Employment and Training Administration, which actually helps people find jobs and manages the unemployment insurance. So if you're ever laid off, it's because of this agency that you can find help. And they provide income for people who have lost their job. And thank goodness for FDR, for these certain organizations to become as refined as they have. We're going to have another review here, so please have your paper and pencil ready. On a sheet of paper, write the word from the word bank that's in the bottom right of the screen that best completes each sentence. So number one, the Department of Blank provides states with funds for the school lunch program. So it might not have been mentioned, but I think you could figure it out just trying to reason through that. Number two, the Department of Commerce is concerned with international blank. Number three, the National Blank Service gathers information about storms and earthquakes. Number 4, the Department of the blank looks after national parks and dams. Number 5, the Employment and Training Administration manages blank insurance for people who have lost their jobs. Now we're on to a what do you think? So what do you think would cause a business to be closed down by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration? This last section of Chapter 6 is going to be closed out with the executive departments that were created since 1945. Some executive departments were created after World War II, and some of the newer departments were changed or combined with other departments. They help manage the country's changing needs and provide services for citizens. The Department of Defense was created in 1949, and it was a combination of the Departments of War and Navy. And so all of the armed forces fall under the control of this department. The Secretary of Defense is actually a civilian and not in the armed forces, and each branch is run by a secretary who is also a civilian. And the Department of Defense headquarters is in Pentagon, Washington, D.C. In peacetime, the Defense Department carries out certain activities that are important to our defense. One branch, called the Army Corps of Engineers, helps to see that rivers and harbors are maintained and improved to help control floods. There's also military academies that the Department of Defense is in charge of, so the training grounds for our military. And so each branch of the armed services has a specific academy. There's the Air Force Academy at Colorado Springs in Colorado. There's the all-famous Army one that's in West Point, New York. And then there's the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. The Department of Housing and Urban Development is also known as HUD. It's the acronym. And it was created in 1955 to help cities. It provides homes, repairs, buildings, and protects consumers. Anyone living in dangerous housing conditions can also contact HUD. If your landlord is a slumlord, contact HUD. And this happens far too often. People live in very dangerous housing conditions, and HUD can help. It deals with many types of problems, including aid to help finance housing for first-time buyers. It teaches water conservation and protects cities from air pollution in developing communities. The Department of Transportation is pretty straightforward. It helps the nation transport goods and services. It ensures safe traveling conditions. It deals with economical and efficient travels. It sets safety standards for motorized vehicles, and it publishes safety manuals for other types of vehicles, and that includes bicycles. It also has other offices such as the Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So they're concerned about three primary things: economic and efficient traveling, safety and standards, and educating the public on how to be safer, and then dealing with transporting goods and services, getting produce from one area to another, things like that. We're going to cover two departments in this one slide: the Department of Energy and the Department of Health and Human Services. The Department of Energy was created in 1977 to protect sources of energy like water power, oil, and natural gas, and someday we're going to see wind too. DOE also regulates the sale of fuel and electricity, so they find new ways to produce energy. For example, the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy directs programs to develop the use of solar energy. Also, private citizens also find ways to use the solar energy, so it helps the industry. We also look towards the Department of Energy in conserving our supplies of oil and natural gas. Unfortunately, they also researched the use of nuclear power as another source of energy, and though it provides great sources of energy, it's also very dangerous. Onto the Department of Health and Human Services. Created in 1979 and famous for this, it protects people in need. Basic human services such as disease prevention and financial aid to low-income families. It also has a Head Start program that's extremely successful for preschool children. They also provide help for disabled or handicapped people. One agency that's under it that's really important that you hear about all the time is the Food and Drug Administration, and they search for treatments and cures for disease, and they also make sure laws concerning food, drugs, and cosmetics are followed so that people aren't becoming ill. The Department of Education was created in 1975, and it oversees our educational system and helps provide ways of creating a way for schools to be held accountable and make sure that we are meeting certain goals for students. So they oversee the educational system, but not only that, it also provides financial aid for anyone in any level of school, middle school, high school, or college, even adult school. Unfortunately, that aid is not as prevalent as it used to be because of cuts in budget. It also ensures that those with special needs are served. There's something called the 504 and IEPs that are written up for students with certain disabilities, and they have a right to a very good education. So the Department of Education ensures that they have access to good schooling. It also encourages programs to improve. So they study and research certain programs within high schools and middle schools to see, are these really working? Are we getting the results we want? And with that, they gather statistics about the school. There you go. The Department of Veterans Affairs was created in 1930, and the main goal was to provide services for ex-military people and their families. So there's a lot of health care involved. There's therapists that are available to help with post-traumatic stress disorder, which is prevalent for veterans, unfortunately, and mental health issues. They operate 160 veterans hospitals and 120 of nation's cemeteries. This is it. This is our last slide before our review. The Department of Homeland Security. The goal of Homeland Security is to protect Americans from terrorist attacks. It protects the infrastructure. And what I mean by infrastructure is like buildings, bridges, any major meeting event areas, anything that creates a social kind of architecture or a way for resources to be transported. Anything that has to do with keeping our system going, they protect. They provide safeguards from terrorist weapons and make borders and ports secure. They prepare citizens for possible emergencies. So if you've ever done a practice of where to go, what to do, that's because of the Department of Homeland Security. They also study intelligence, what's going on with other countries, what kind of information about the enemy they can get, and information from all government agencies. With the use of satellites, they're able to get a lot of information about other countries.